And welcome to Lift FM 98.5, 103.3, and of course 97.9 on your FM dial. Worldwide as well at liftfm.com. And don't forget, here on Second Chances, all of our programs, we keep an archive of them, and they are available at AdvantageRadioMinistries.org. Once again, AdvantageRadioMinistries.org. Click on Second Chances and then scroll down, select the guest that you would like to hear. And it's that easy. You can go back and listen to a program. If you caught a program earlier, heard half of it, or had to leave before the second half, you can always go back and visit the website and catch the entire interview here at Second Chances. And we have a wonderful guest with us tonight. We'd like to introduce her. She's the author of the book, People of the Book, the Extreme Devotion Series. Her name is Kathi Macias. Is that correct, Kathi Macias?
Yes, it is.
Okay, we got that correct. Now, Kathi, before we get into the book, I mentioned to you off the air, and we'll do this on the air, that the reason we do this program is we like to hear what the Lord has done for people in their lives, but to kind of establish that, we'd like to learn a little bit about you, where you're from. Did you come from a Christian home, things like that?
Actually, I did not come from a Christian home. I always thought I was a Christian. We all just assumed we were because I guess we were born in America or something. We believed in God, and we thought that was all we needed. So none of us had a personal relationship with Christ. And it was actually, I was in my mid-20s when my two younger brothers and my mom all came to know the Lord and began to pray for me and witness to me. So I was actually 26 years old when I just remember one day I just was feeling maybe torn down the middle, as if there was something really going on that I didn't understand. And I remembered my mom always telling me, since she'd come to know the Lord, that I needed Jesus and I needed to pray. And so I got down on my knees one day and just asked the Lord to come into my life and to just become my Lord and Savior. Those were the things she had told me I needed to do, and I never looked back. Things just changed so radically from that point forward that I just totally gave myself to serving Him, and have been doing that now for close to 40 years.
Wow. Now, according to your sketch here about your history, you are an award-winning author of more than 30 books, and you're also a popular speaker at women's retreats, conferences, and churches. Tell me about how you actually got into to write that first book way back when.
I knew I wanted to be a writer from the time I discovered words. I think it was probably before I started school. I was absolutely in love with books and with words, and I remember when I was, maybe 12 or 13, telling my friend, who is now my husband, Al. We've known each other since we were 6, and we were walking home from school one day, and I told him I was going to be a writer someday, and he reminds me of that to this day. Of course, there was a long way to go from that point to actually making something happen, but I suppose I started doing some serious writing and trying to actually do something with it and getting it published after I became a Christian, because I had this thing all figured out once I got saved, and I thought, okay, that's it, I'm going to write for God, and I didn't realize how much work the Lord had to do in me first. So there was a long process from there where I began selling a few little articles and magazine pieces here and there, but I eventually was able to get a job at Gospel Light Publishing here in Ventura, California, not far from where I live now. And it was sort of an entry level, part-time, no benefits, minimum wage job, and I was just thrilled to have it. And it was the best training I ever had, and I was so thrilled to actually be able to work on Sunday school curriculum and that sort of thing. And that's actually where it started. It was out of that I was able to land my first book contract, and that was, my goodness, that was in the late 1980s. So it's been a while, and I've been publishing ever since.
Was your first book with the company you were working for?
Yes, it was, and that was a huge help. Regal Books is a part of Gospel Light Publishing, and one of the other ladies who worked there, we were talking one day and just decided we would really like to do a compilation book of women's devotionals, but not just from us, but from all sorts of women from all over, and that was that was before compilation books had really burst onto the scene. We kind of got in on the ground floor of that, and we did a devotional called A Moment a Day, which actually ended up being a bestseller. We were so excited about that. So that was our very first attempt at publishing a book, and right after that I did my first novel, and from then on it was kind of a combination of nonfiction and fiction books both.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to ask this next question. It really doesn't have a lot to do with our subject matter, but I just have to do it to just kind of be funny. My experience to California, my wife and I, we went to San Francisco, and my wife now accentuates that California is always cold and dreary, and I keep telling her, no, it's just in the San Francisco area. So is that the case where you're at? It's a nice warm environment?
Oh, absolutely, yes. San Francisco, I never go there except maybe late summer or early fall when they actually do have a little bit of sunshine where it tries to peek through. I don't like cold, damp weather, and it is always like that up there. But down here in Southern California, I'm sort of midway between Los Angeles and San Diego, and we get a lot of sunshine. In fact, right now is our perfect time of year. It's really nice. By July and August, it's actually a bit warmer than what we care for, but it's really gorgeous most of the time.
Okay. Now, it's interesting, Kathi, as we're going to talk a lot about the book that's the one we're going to discuss called People of the Book, the Extreme Devotion Series. And it's kind of interesting because this is we're actually recording this program in the beginning of May, several days after the United States went in and finally captured and eventually killed Osama bin Laden. And this book deals with extreme devotion of people in, Islamic religion, the Quran, and things like that. Now, I know that this particular book is a series of books that are based on real people and stories as well as your own research. But just out of curiosity, as we start to talk about the book, why did you choose Saudi Arabia as one of the settings?
Well, of course, I chose it long before any of this happened with Osama bin Laden, and we now know, of course, that this has taken place, and he has been killed. And, of course, he was born and raised in Saudi Arabia and was very much a product of that male-dominated society. I chose Saudi Arabia because I really felt in this series there are 4 books, and each is set in a different country where there are Christians persecuted for their faith, and I felt that one of the books had to deal with a country that was, for the most part, a Muslim nation, and this one certainly is. Saudi Arabia really epitomizes that. It is a very, very closed society. It is a society that is relatively modern and well-to-do financially for the most part, but it is extremely male-dominated, and women do not have any rights there. And that was my biggest challenge. I wanted to do that, but I knew it was going to be difficult because I had to find a way to show that women there could with the gospel. And, of course, as I did my research, I found out that many of them are having dreams and visions, and they are actually seeing Isa, as they call Jesus, and are turning to the Lord. And this is pretty exciting to me. And then I also discovered that despite the fact that women are very repressed there, most of them live in families that are well-to-do enough that they have Internet access. And so that's when I figured out, here's how we can connect them with the other part of the world and sort of bring the story full circle to where they would be actually able to communicate with other Christians.
Now, part of your research, did you actually go to Saudi Arabia, or was a lot of it just done by interviewing and email and things like that?
No, I didn't go there because it is such a closed society. It simply wasn't a wise move on that part, and I was able to do a lot of Internet research and reading. But also, I met this young woman named Dolly, who is actually quoted on the front of the book, who had spent the majority of her life there. She was born in Lebanon, but she and her family moved to the Saudi kingdom when she was just a young girl, and she grew up there and spent more than 20 years there before she came to the States a couple of years ago. So she was just excellent for working with me on the book and getting that realistic feel to it, because I tried to actually find women who lived there now who would work with me, but they were actually too frightened. I met many of them online, but they said they just couldn't do it. They couldn't take the chance.
Mm. Now, obviously, when you talk about the Middle East, you talk about Saudi Arabia, you talk about all those countries. You hear the term the Quran, and in the Quran, it clearly states, as you mentioned, that the women are equal in the eyes of Allah. However, how does this play out in real life and within your book? And I know you kind of touched on it, but how can they supposedly follow this doctrine, but yet the women are really suppressed? How can that be?
That's very sad, and it's also very true. If they went strictly by the Quran, they could not excuse the type of treatment the women get there. But it is sort of a a Muslim version of the good old boys club. I mean, they do run things, and when the Saudi kingdom is very strong, it is very steeped in their own cultures and customs. And if one runs up against the other, basically, if tradition runs up against the Word of God, or their word, I should say, their word, the Koran, they will opt to go with their tradition every time. And that's what has caused this incredible suppression of women and the very male-dominated society that they have.
How would you say that Saudi Arabia stacks up in the overall area of women's rights and freedoms compared to other countries in the Middle East?
It's probably one of the worst. I mean, none of them are probably good, but it is one of the worst. Women are not allowed to drive, and even though some of them now are able to go to college and get an education, it is very difficult, even with a degree, for them to get a job. And, I mean, particularly if you figure they can't drive, it's just very hard for them to get around. Everything is very, very regimented for them, and a lot of it will depend on the type of family they're in, which is something I wanted to show in the book. There are actually two young women in the book who are cousins, Farah and Noura, who are in what you would consider loving families. Their families do love them. Their parents are good to them, so long as they stay within the confines of accepted Saudi and Muslim behavior. To cross over those lines becomes very dangerous, and that's something I wanted to show, that within those confines there is a loving relationship very often, but if they don't adhere to that, and if they rebel against it in any way, suddenly the parents, or the father, or the brothers, the husband, whoever it may be in that situation, are again faced with dealing with keeping these women under control and within the confines of the Saudi culture, as opposed to, it's running up against how do they feel about them, their emotional attachment to these women. And most of the time, sadly, the cultural traditions will win out. And so therefore, this is why there is so much abuse of women, even to the point of honor killings on a fairly regular basis.
Mm. Now, there is a side to this that even makes it more troubling to hear, and I'm going to attempt to pronounce this name correctly. If I mispronounce it, quickly correct me, but I will tell you the person we're referring to here is the professor of religious studies at the University of Louisville, Rafat Hassan. Is that correct?
As far as I know, that's how I would pronounce it too, yes.
Okay, Rafat Hassan. The way Islam has been practiced in most Muslim societies for centuries has left millions of Muslim women with battered bodies, minds, and souls. Is that what your research has also proved to be the fact?
Sad but true, yes, it is. Many of them are frightened. They're beaten down and oppressed and afraid to talk, and many of them have suffered severe physical abuse.
Mm. Now, on the positive side, if there's any positive side, people that are in that broken state probably, if they're able to hear the word of the Lord, they're probably much more receptive to it. Am I right about that?
I believe that's exactly the case, and that's one of the things I brought out in the book, is we've got these two young women who, even though they are loved within their family, there's no sense of personal satisfaction in their own faith. Their relationships are severely restricted, their movements are restricted, and they are very well aware of cases where friends and acquaintances have either been beaten or even killed in the so-called honor killings. And so there's an element of fear even within a family relationship that appears to be good on the surface. So these women, yes, they are very, very cowed and beaten down, and yet when they find one, when Isa comes to them and offers them this unconditional love, they do seem to be very receptive to it.
Any kind of statistics that show the number of women beaten, abused, or killed by their husbands or family members? Any kind of numbers out there to?
Nothing reliable that I could really, pin down. There's such a widespread, and then there's so much denial. It's a little bit like my book on China when I tried to find out how many Christians were in prison for their faith. Well, the government said there weren't any. So it's a little tough to pin it down. But my friend Dolly, who had lived there for so many years, shared with me how calm it was. In fact, her dearest friend during her growing up years there was a Muslim from a Muslim family, whereas my friend Dolly was not only a Christian, but her entire family was Christian, although quietly so, and attended an underground church. But because her whole family was Christian, they protected one another. When Dolly's friend became a Christian, she keep it secret from her family, and in fact, when they did find out, they beat her in an attempt to try to get her to recant and to, recommit to Allah. And when she wouldn't do it, they burned her to death. And this is something Dolly told me she'd never forgotten. When she was able to leave the Saudi kingdom and come here, she made the decision that she would speak out for the many women there who could not speak for themselves, who literally had no voice. And so she said it's so common that it's just heartbreaking.
This next category, I know that, here in the West, we probably, to a point we realize that women in the Middle East, if we're not really researching it or reading your book, we probably realize that they're not treated the way they should be, but we don't really think about it. And then when we hear this, we're like, wow, this is really bad. But, there's another side to it. It seems like here in the West, we've been very slow to embrace the rights and protection of women in the Islamic countries. Is that because they're Islamic countries, in your opinion, or what do you think that reason is?
That's been a real concern of mine, and we have not come to their defense as we should, and I think some of it simply is the fact that since 9/11 in particular, we've almost bent over backwards not to cause offense to anyone in the Muslim faith, but we really aren't doing any favors to these women. And my greatest concern is that not only are we not standing up for them, but we are actually, in many places in this country, seriously discussing in the courts allowing Sharia law, which covers honor killings, to be allowed into and practiced within our own country.
Now, one of the things that is really, really kind of scary to even think this, because we just have so many freedoms here, we don't even really appreciate that, and that's for sure. But in your book, you talk about the implication of the conversation to Christianity within the context of an oppressive Islamic regime. Why do you think that conversation of Christianity is such an issue to the Muslims?
I have to believe there's a fear-driven anger there, a hatred that it borders on the satanic. It's really not. I think one of the things I wanted people to understand in the book is that these are people just like us with the imprint of God on their very souls, who have just simply been deceived, and they need Christ every bit as much as we do. And I noticed even with some Muslim women, when here I am thinking I really want to be of some help, the reaction sometimes can be not only negative but hostile. There's a hostility that rises up, and I think it's simply a matter of fear of losing control and the way of life, the way things have always been. And it is a very, very strong belief system that we're up against. When you stop and think that you're dealing with people who are willing to strap bombs on themselves to, ensure their passage into heaven when they die, and hopefully they want to take a lot of people with them. This is not the type of thing we've dealt with in the past with other so-called enemies, where you could rationalize with people and where you could make treaties with people and where you were dealing with people who probably didn't want to die any more than you did. But now we're dealing with people that human life simply doesn't have the same value as it does to us. And so that's an entirely different thing. So there is a hatred driven by that kind of thinking that is something so far beyond what we understand.
We're speaking with Kathi Macias. She is the author of the book, actually a series of devotionals called People of the Book, the Extreme Devotional Series, and we're talking about Islam and the Quran and the extreme Islamic religion and the oppression of women. And I got to tell you, Kathi, one of the things that comes out is there's healings and miracles within these Islamic regimes. And to what extent is that going on?
You know, that is very true, and that is exciting to me. That is light
It is
shining in the middle of the darkness. You know, the darker something gets, the brighter the light is. And you know, in the scriptures it says that the darkness could not comprehend the light, and that means it can't put it out. That's actually what the word originally meant. It could not snuff out the light. The light burns no matter how dark it may be. And I think that that's true not only in the Islamic countries, but in any country where the extreme oppression of Christians continues around the world, and it does. As we know, there have been more people martyred for their Christian faith in the last 100 years than in all the 1900 years prior to that. And we often don't stop and think about that. We think of martyrdom as something that happened in the first couple of centuries of the church, but it has actually accelerated throughout the world, and yet those are the places where the light burns the brightest, where the church is just on fire and spreading, and people are coming to the Lord in droves, and it's so exciting. It's nothing that we can explain in the natural, say, well, you know, I had, the four spiritual law books, and I explained it to everyone, and they just suddenly understood it. It's something that basically just happens without. We just might be blessed to be a part of it, but it happens without us. We just sort of show up. But God is just doing this phenomenal work in these countries where the darkness is so strong.
Now, there's a belief among many people that there's three religions and one God. Now, this is what many people think about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Is this an accurate depiction?
Not at all, and I think it's one of the greatest fallacies and the most dangerous ones on the planet today. It is Allah and the God that we know and serve are not one and the same. In fact, one of the sayings in the Islam religion is a quote from Allah who says, "I have no son." Now, how could God say he has no son when we know that he does? And
Absolutely.
You know, he is the only one, the only name given among men under heaven by which we must be saved. There is no other alternative. There's only one way to come to the Father, and Jesus told us it was through him, no other way. And that's why he's reaching out to these people who are deceived. But my biggest concern is that Christians, in their effort to be loving and non-judgmental, will enable people to remain in a religion that's going to take them straight into hell. We need to confront with love, but we need to speak the truth in love as the scriptures tell us to do, because that's how we grow up in all things in Christ. It is a matter of maturing and of stepping out and of having the courage to say, this is the way, the only way. There is no other way. The good news is not that you get to stay where you are and make it that way, but that there is a way. It's already been paid for you, and you don't hell. You can be a part of this way that is all about Jesus. And I think that's what it comes down to with this thing with Osama bin Laden dying. People have said to me, "Gee, isn't it wonderful? Aren't you glad that he's dead?" And I think, how can I rejoice that a soul has gone into eternity without Christ? I'm glad that his evil presence is no longer here to do the things he's been doing. And I rejoice, with the troops and our country and all of that. But I cannot rejoice that a soul has been lost, because, God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And I believe God grieves every time a soul steps across that line into eternity without his Son in his heart.
A couple more things we want to touch on. Of course, we want to talk about how you can get the book. But last question, I want to talk about the book. If you could say, readers, when you pick up the book, this is what I want you to know or do as a result of reading the book, People of the Book, the Extreme Devotion Series. What would that be that you'd want them to know or do as a result of reading the book?
Well, the whole series, but particularly this one that deals with the Islam religion, I want people to come away with a new compassion for those who are trapped in that deception, but with a renewed passion to preach the uncompromising truth and the unconditional love that can pull people out of the deception they're in and set their feet on solid ground and bring them into the kingdom of God while there is still time. Because as we learned on Sunday when Osama bin Laden was killed, from one minute till the next, one minute he thought he dwelt in safety, the next minute he was in eternity. And that is true for all of us, and that's what I want people to come away with after they read the book.
Now, of course, if you're listening to this and you say, boy, that sounds like an interesting book and an interesting series, people of the book, the Extreme Devotion series, and Kathi, how can one obtain a copy of it?
Well, there are several ways, of course. It's in a lot of stores and many of the online venues. I would love it if people would come to my website, which is simply KathiMacias.com, KathiMacias.com. They can watch videos about each of the books to better decide what they might like to read. They can sign up for my weekly devotional newsletter that goes out every week in English and in Spanish. They can email me, and I will email them back, and they can find out where I'm going to be appearing or signing, maybe in their local areas.
So they can not only can they find out information about your other books on that site as well?
Absolutely, yes. They can see all of the current books. There's probably at least 20 of them there on the website itself.
Okay. And once again, that website, if they'd like to visit it?
Kathi, Kathi, Macias, Macias.com.
Kathi, most important reason, the reason we even put this program on the air is to help people, encourage them, and if they're willing, their heart's willing, to get them set free. And if there are women out there that maybe they're not in a foreign country, but maybe they're suffering with these kind of things, these abuse and different things in our own country, that are hearing this program and would like to be set free by just saying a simple prayer, would you pray for those women right now, Kathi?
Oh, I would be honored to do so. Father, thank you so much that your Father's heart goes out to each one of us. It is calling us to come to you. That is your desire, Lord, not that any be lost, but that each would come to you. Father, you stand at the head of the road with your arms outstretched, watching for the prodigals to return. And when you see us coming, Lord, you race out to welcome us, to greet us, to embrace us, and to even carry us home if we are on our own. And so I thank you for that, Lord, and I thank you for every hungry heart that is listening now, and that you are calling them, and that you will carry them home and accept them with unconditional love. Father, I thank you for that healing touch and that receiving of everyone who turns to you. And we give you all the glory in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen.
Our guest tonight on Second Chances has been Kathi Macias, and she's the author of the book, People of the Book, the Extreme Devotion series. And when you picked out to do this book, Kathi, one last thing we want to ask you. What made you focus in on Saudi Arabia, just because of the extreme nature?
Yes, it just seemed to epitomize every extremity of these of the Muslim faith. It really carried all the traditions and everything that some of the other countries had too, but this one seemed to have it all in such a dark, dark place. And I thought, if I can show Jesus' light shining there, then they'll know that he can shine anywhere. Amen.
What a great way to end. We'd like to thank you, Kathi, for being a guest. And remember her website, www.Kathi, Kathi, Macias, Macias.com, and that'll give you all the information about this book, People of the Book, the Extreme Devotion series, plus where she's going to be speaking and all that other great information. Kathi, thank you for joining us here on Second Chances.
And thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure. Tune in next week for more Second Chances right here at Lift FM, 98.5, 103.3 FM, and 97.9 on your FM radio dial. And welcome to Lift FM 98.5, 103.3 FM, and 97.9 on your FM radio dial, and worldwide at liftfm.com. And of course, all of our programs are always available at AdvantageRadioMinistries.org. That's www.AdvantageRadioMinistries.org. Click on Second Chances, and you can scroll down to the name of the guest that you would like to hear the interview in its entirety. Now, on the program today, we actually have a person, if you were going through and searching, you'd say, well, you've had them on before. They actually, she was with us several years ago talking about one of her other books, and that is Kathi Macias. And Kathi, thank you for coming back with us here on Second Chances.
Well, it's my privilege to be here. Thank you so much.
Now, today we're going to talk about the latest book, and the third part of this series will be out in the fall, but this one is entitled Deliver Me from Evil and Special Delivery. Now, what was the first book in the series, and what's the third book going to be called?
Deliver Me from Evil is the first. It released last fall. Special Delivery has just now released, and then the final book, The Deliverer, will be out in September.
So when you talk about the trilogy, it'll be the Deliver Me from Evil, Special Delivery, and The Deliverer.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Now, Kathi, of course, several years ago when we had you on the program, one of the things that we always like to do is we like to learn about our guest and give the people listening to the program the opportunity to learn about the guest. And why don't you start off and give us a little bit of background of, who you are and where you're from and things of that nature.
Okay. Well, I am living in Southern California, and that's actually where I was born. I grew up in Southern California, but when I married my husband, he went to the military, so we spent a little time in various places. I've lived in Texas and Colorado and Washington State, and ended up back here now. So maybe not in the same town, but fairly close. We're still in the Southern California area and near a lot of our family. I've always wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember. The minute I discovered words and books, I was hooked, and I am just thrilled that the Lord has allowed that to happen for me.
Have you always lived your life, Kathi, for the Lord?
No, not at all. Actually, I was not raised in a Christian home, although honestly, if anyone had asked me at any point in time if I were a Christian, I certainly would have said I was. I guess I just kind of assumed I was born in America. I probably was a Christian. I'm old enough that I remember the days when we could actually pray or even read the Bible in school, and when we did the Christmas program, it was actually a Christmas program. And so I, having sat through so many of the rehearsals for it, actually knew the second chapter of Luke by heart as a child. But again, I was not a Christian. I popped in and out of church with friends as often as I could, but I didn't really come to know the Lord until I was 26 years old.
Tell us how that came to be.
Well, as I said, no one in our family really was a Christian other than my praying grandmother, my dad's mom, who was from Germany, and she was a little package of dynamite. She used to tell us in her little German accent, "You need Jesus in your heart." And we knew she was praying for us. When I was in my 20s and living in Colorado, actually, and my personal life seemed pretty much of a mess, by that time my mom and my brothers had both come to the Lord, and they were all praying for me. And I called my mom one day and just was lamenting what a mess my life was and how unhappy I was. It was, pretty much all about me and feeling sorry for myself. And she told me, she just kept saying over and over, echoing what my grandmother used to say, that you need Jesus, that's what you need. And after I hung up the phone, I just was very convicted that she was right, and I fell to my knees by the side of the bed and began to pray. And, I'm not one given to visions, but at that very moment I saw myself on a dusty street with a crowd of people around me. They were screaming and crying and looking at something, and I looked, and it was Jesus carrying his cross, walking, carrying it along, walking and crying, or with tears and blood and sweat pouring down his face and his body, and I began to cry. And when he got there where I was, it was like he drew up even with me and looked past everyone else right into my eyes, and he said, "I did it for you." And at that very moment, it became personal. It wasn't. I had heard all my life that Jesus died for the sins of the world, but it didn't register. It was not a personal thing until that moment. And that's literally what totally changed my life, was those 5 words.
So you make the decision to serve the Lord, and since then you've put out more than 35 books. Tell us what the first book was and when that was.
Well, the first book, actually I had two released in 1 year. The very first time, one was a little novel called Yesterday, Today, and Forever that I kind of get a kick out of sometimes when I look back at it, but I'm not sure I'd want anybody else to read it at this point, and it didn't go too far. But I also did a woman's devotional called A Moment a Day, and it was a compilation. It was just when compilations were starting to take off, and surprisingly, it took off very well and became a bestseller for our publisher, and I was just thrilled. I was completely hooked. I knew at that point I had found my niche and what God had called me to do, and that was way back in the the late 80s, not quite 90 yet. So that's when all that started, and I've been writing them ever since.
Now, on this program, over the last 3 or so years we've been doing the program, we've had the pleasure to have many people who have written books and talked about their experiences. How does one, and each time we ask this question similar, we get such a different answer, but obviously there's many people out there who love to write and would love to have their book or books published, but it's not quite that easy. So how did you actually get your first book published?
Well, you're right that it's not easier, and I think it gets more difficult all the time as the number of, it seems like there's just millions of books out there, but actually publishers are very limited in how many they do accept of all the proposals they get. And with more and more people wanting to write books, that narrows the chances down. But even when I started, it was very difficult. I had some experience because I studied journalism in my earlier years and was writing already as a freelance reporter, a columnist, doing some work for magazines and that sort of thing. And I think that's what helped me tremendously, because it built my portfolio. It gave me a foot in the door, established some credibility and experience in my writing. And then when an opening came up at a publishing house, it was an entry-level position with no benefits, and it was part-time, so it wasn't really what some people would think of as a dream job, but it really got my foot in the door with Christian publishing, and as a result, once I was established there, it made it easier for me when I did have a proposal to approach the publisher and actually show it to him, so my proposal didn't get lost in the infamous slush pile like so many of them do. So for me, that was what got me started.
Now, it also says on your biography here that you are a popular speaker for women's retreats, conferences, and churches. How did you get started doing that?
Well, that's what's really amazing, because when I became a Christian at the age of 26, I made a so-called deal with the Lord. I didn't consult him. This was just my idea. And I told him I would do anything he wanted me to do except public speaking. And, God has a sense of humor. And it took a while. I will tell you, it took a while. I went back to school, to Bible college, and that forces you to get up in front of people and speak, but it still wasn't something I was enamored of. But the more I began to do it, a little bit easier it became. And one of the positions I also got, since I was working part-time at the publishing house, I got a part-time position on a church staff doing biblical counseling. And every now and then I'd be called on to go fill in at women's ministries or do various things that needed to be done around the church. And so more and more God just kept putting me in a position of being forced to do public speaking and teaching. And pretty soon I came to a point where I realized I actually kind of enjoyed it. And pretty soon, before I knew it, people were inviting me to come. And now, just in the last 2 weeks, I've been in Dallas and in Canada, and I'm heading out again next week to several other places to do this. And I spend an awful lot of time on the road, but I don't like the traveling part, but I love it once I get there. I love the ministry part of the speaking and teaching.
Mm. So tell us, first of all, this is the second part in a three-part series we're going to talk about. We're visiting with Kathi Macias. She is the author of Deliver Me from Evil, Special Delivery, and the third part of the series, which will be out in the fall, The Deliverer. Kathi, what brought these three parts in the series together to begin with?
I never would have probably considered writing a series on a topic of such difficulty and darkness, which is what it's about, and that's human trafficking. But I was talking with one of my publishers. We were sort of winding up the last series that I had done. In fact, I think you and I talked about one of the books, which was People of the Book, and it was a series about the persecuted church. So that was a tough topic, too, and we were talking about where do we want to go next? What topic do we take on next, because that's the type of writing I really like to do, is topical, things that are hot button issues that people are dealing with or need to know about. To me, it's sort of what Jesus did, as far as he would use parables to not just entertain, but to educate and to challenge his listeners, and that's what the type of writing I like to do. So as we talked about possibilities of where to go next, she actually presented the idea to me of considering doing a fiction series about human trafficking, and of course I knew about it, but I didn't know a lot about it, and I like so many people, I think I figured it was something that went on far, far away and didn't really impact my life in any way. But when I began to do research and found out how prevalent it was, not only worldwide, but right here in our own country, I was absolutely stunned. And I called her back and I said, yes, if we can help to, open people's eyes to realize how awful this is and how dangerous it is and how the church needs to get involved to fight this, then I'm more than willing to take it on. So that's how we went from there into the 3-book series.
On this cheat sheet that I have in front of me, where it gives me some bullet points about you, one of the lines that says here just kind of really says a lot, and probably a lot of us are shocked if we stop and think about this. Contrary to some existing misconceptions, American citizens are also coerced into sex slavery. Tell us a little bit more about that line. That's a pretty strong statement.
It really is, and that was probably one of the hardest things for me to accept. You hear at least I had heard the figure that worldwide it is estimated there are approximately 27 million people in some form of human trafficking, slavery today, but that also includes people who are held for slave labor, for unpaid labor, and of course for sex trafficking, and also for involuntary organ donations. That's the nicest way I can think of to say it. Those three are all entailed in the human trafficking idea, and so the 27 million people worldwide is horrifying enough. But then when you begin to bring it home and you find out that the State Department has given the estimate that they consider it a conservative estimate that somewhere between 100 and 300,000 minors, this is not even older people over 18, this is all children under 18, are being held in sexual slavery in this country right now. That is appalling, and that just stunned me when I learned that, and I realized that, okay, this is going on here. How does this happen? In our own country, how does this actually take place? Well, I found out that some of them are brought in from other countries. They come across borders that aren't as guarded as they should be, and they're smuggled in that way. Some are lured in, whether it's Americans right here, and teenagers can be very vulnerable and fall for the wrong people and be lured into something they don't know what they're getting into. But also, children are kidnapped. Teenagers are kidnapped right off of our own streets, and I have that very scenario intertwined into the series because I wanted people to understand how important it is to be aware ourselves and to make our children aware, not paranoid, but aware that they need to observe certain safety practices, stay in groups and not go in private places by themselves or run down the alley by themselves. Something that simple can totally change a life, and someone can be snatched up and never heard from again, because the law enforcement will tell you that when a young person like that disappears, even if they're declared or classified as a runaway, very often it isn't a runaway situation. It's actually that they've been scooped up into this awful lifestyle, in which case the chances of ever finding them alive are very slim.
It's sad to say, but when a lot of times you think of human trafficking, you think of things that go on in other countries, and you just don't think, like you just mentioned, that it actually happens in this country. And it's scary when you stop and think about it.
It really is. It's awful that it goes on anywhere, but we like to think that that's something that obviously would only take place in some third world country where, law enforcement is corrupt and being paid off. And of course, situations like countries where girls are not as highly valued as boy children, it's not unusual for a family who already has too many mouths to feed to actually just sell one of their daughters simply to get enough food to feed the rest of them. And so a lot of these children have no chance. They're just sold into it at the age of 3 or 4, and that's, if they live to be a teenager, it's a miracle. But and as horrible and deplorable as that is, when you realize that it can be literally in our backyard. The Department of Homeland Defense has or Homeland Security, I'm sorry, has a website with a video on it called In Plain Sight to help people understand how this can go on right in our own neighborhoods, and we might not even be aware of it or know what to watch for. But, I've had people say that to me, well, it's impossible. If this were going on here, we would know about it. And I'm really grateful to have discovered that particular video that helps people understand what to look for and why you wouldn't necessarily be aware of it if you weren't consciously looking for such a thing.
We're visiting with Kathi Macias. She is the author of the three-part series, Deliver Me from Evil, Special Delivery, and, of course, the third and final part in this series will be out in the fall. It's entitled The Deliverer. Kathi, how do you define sexual slavery or forced sexual slavery, and is it the same as human trafficking?
Well, sexual slavery is a part of, it's under the umbrella of human trafficking, but it can, certainly human trafficking can involve other things as well. But sexual slavery is anything where a person is forced to perform any sort of sexual act against their will for whatever reason. And the government includes in that any minor, whether they give implied consent or not. If they are a minor, then it's considered sexual slavery. They really don't have the legal right to give that kind of permission or, to acquiesce to that sort of thing, and usually it's done out of fear anyway. So anyone who's involved in it as a minor, bringing in money for someone else or whatever the case may be, is considered to be held in sexual slavery.
Sex traffickers, as you've talked about, use a variety of methods to condition their victims into prostitution and other forms of sex for play. What are some of those conditioning techniques that they may use to do these things?
Well, young children can be, especially preteens or young teens, can be very vulnerable, especially if they're not in a situation where they feel secure or where they've had safe boundaries. Maybe they're, as the song says, they're looking for love in all the wrong places. It doesn't take much to lure them in, maybe with a little bit older boyfriend or something, but there are many other ways too. One of the things we tell parents to watch for is if you have a young girl in school and then all of a sudden she makes this brand new friend and just, a girl, not a guy, and they want her to come to the house and to spend the night and do all these things, you really need to check them out first. There's nothing wrong with going over and meeting the family and getting to know them because, it could be a case of a young girl who supposedly lives with her uncle or something, and it turns out, he's not the uncle. And they often use young girls to go onto the playgrounds at school, they even enroll them in school and try to get them to enlist other young girls to come to the house, and whether they know what they're doing or not, sometimes the girls come back and sometimes they don't. So there are all sorts of ploys that they use to either lure or trick young girls especially, but even boys on occasion, into this sort of lifestyle.
There's a term you use called child sex tourism. Tell us what it is and how big is it?
Oh, it's huge, unfortunately. Now, this takes place primarily in other countries, but the so-called customers, many of them are from this country. They can plan their vacations, I guess you would say, online, and they go to these other countries, and they can basically rent some child for, whether it's for a matter of hours or days or a couple of weeks before they come back. They use them, throw them away, and come home. And that's basically what their vacation is. It is a child sex tourism trap where they go and it can be prosecuted to the nth degree, but very often isn't. Most of them do get away with it. You occasionally hear about someone caught in that sort of situation, but for the most part, in those countries where this takes place, law enforcement will turn a blind eye for the right amount of money.
I would imagine it's probably difficult for girls and women who have actually been fortunate enough to come out of the sex trade not to blame men for all the problems in the world. And is that a typical response when that does happen?
Oh, it sure is. One of the things we tell people is that although very few actually are rescued, and we're hoping to increase those numbers, even when they are so emotionally and psychologically as well as physically and spiritually damaged that the return on bringing them to a place of healing is so small, and it takes so much patience and so much time. There are safe houses being established around the country where these young girls can go and get the help they need, and of course, if they can be reunited with their families, then families need to be brought into that healing and recovery process. They need to understand from the beginning they're not getting back the same little girl that disappeared from their home, whether it was weeks, months, or years before. They are getting a child who has been exposed to things that no child should ever even have to know about. And the horror that they feel and the revulsion that these children, they may even be afraid of their own fathers at that point. So it is a long, long healing process, and the recovery rate, as I said, sometimes isn't too good, but the Christian homes are having obviously a much better rate of recovery than the others, but I'm grateful for any where they're providing the help they can get to get them out of there.
You say that in the series here that the sex trafficking industry is the second largest illegal activity in the world behind drug trafficking. I guess the obvious question is, if that's the case, then why aren't we hearing more about this?
That is probably my primary frustration, and I know others who are working to expose this as well feel the same way. It has been almost ignored in the media, and you do occasionally on a cable station or whatever see something, or there was a movie out a couple years ago called Taken that kind of shows what happens and how they get these girls drugged and into this situation, but the movie unfortunately perpetuates the idea that it only happens in other countries. There just isn't enough exposure in the media for people to understand how widespread it is and how dangerous it is, and how it's actually, the whole thing is run by organized crime. This isn't an occasional sporadic pimp setting up some place, in the neighborhood somewhere. That may be part of it, but the biggest part is organized crime, as surely as it is with drugs or illegal guns or any of these other illegal activities. And because of that, not only is it not well known, but it's dangerous for people to go charging in as a sort of a Lone Ranger rescuer to try to, to help some of these children or whatever. This is something that I tell people is not a Lone Ranger mission. This is something you need to get with an organization who's already working to rescue these kids and find out what you can do in a safe manner, because it is so dangerous to cross them. This is a huge financial crime, and people make so much money off of it that they're not going to take it lightly when someone comes in to threaten their income. And so they obviously are not only fighting to keep it out of the media, but fighting to keep people from learning about it so that they won't come in and rescue these kids.
Kathi, how can parents be more vigilant in protecting their own children from predators, but also, keep their eyes open in schools, churches, or within their communities?
Well, one of the things we advise them, again, as I said earlier, you don't want your children to become paranoid and afraid to go out the door, but they really need to understand from an early age. If your children are old enough that you allow them to play outside alone or to walk to school alone, they need to understand to stay in groups. They need to understand not to go down back alleys, or if they're at the beach together, they don't go to the restroom by themselves. These are just very simple, basic safety rules that need to be drilled into them. And without going into detail about, obviously, what could happen to them, they need to understand that it's very important when they're young to know these things. And as they get older, obviously, you can tell them more and get them more involved. The other thing is to really go first to your local church and find out from your pastor, is there something already in place here? Are we already, do we have a ministry to this type of situation that we can get involved in? If not, can we invite someone from one of these many ministries involved in this to come and speak to us and help us to know how to establish such a thing? Because there are people from all of these organizations, and I do it myself quite often. We go into churches and schools and civic groups and explain to them, here's what you can do to get something started and how you can make it safe and effective without endangering other people, without reinventing the wheel if there's something already going on, so that people are working together in all of this.
We're visiting with Kathi Macias. She is the author of more than 35 books, and currently we're talking about the second and three-part series. First part, Deliver Me from Evil, special delivery, and then the third series will be out in the fall called The Deliverer. And, of course, it deals with human sex trafficking. And Kathi, if someone would like to get the first part of the series, second part of the series, and eventually the third part of the series, how can one obtain a copy?
Well, there are various ways. Most of the Christian bookstores and even some of the secular ones are carrying them across the country. If you are unable to find them in the store, they can certainly order them, but you can also find them online most anywhere at any of the major venues, Amazon or ChristianBooks.com or Barnes & Noble. But if they'd like to just come to my website, which is KathyMacias.com or BoldFiction.com, they can go straight there. They can watch the videos that go with the movies. They can learn more about them, and they can click and order them right there.
And finally, and most importantly, Kathi, the reason that we put this program on is obviously to give people opportunity to be set free, to be healed in some cases, to be educated. But if someone is listening to this program and maybe they have been in this situation before, are really dealing with a lot of pain and suffering, or perhaps they're suspicious that maybe they're being lured into, or somebody they know is being lured into a situation like that, would you lead us in a word of prayer to get these people help?
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you. Father God, thank you so much that you are the deliverer, Lord, that you are the one who cares for even the sparrow that falls, Lord, and you care so much more for each person who is enslaved in this horrible lifestyle. You want to protect those who would be drawn in, and you want to deliver those who are already there and set them free, Father. And I pray now for wisdom, and for those who might be wondering, should I say something? Is there someone I should call? Is there someone I could talk to? Lord, help them. Bring them to the right place, to the right person, to be able to get the wise and godly counsel that they need, Lord, and protect them, Father. Deliver any who are getting sucked into this horrible lifestyle, Lord. Just protect them and deliver them and bring them to a place of peace and safety, Father. And for those who are there now, I don't even know if anyone could possibly be listening, but if there is no place too dark that the light of God cannot shine and dispel the darkness. That is the biggest thing, that we not lose hope, because God alone is our hope and our deliverer and our peace, and he will come if we will cling to him. Father, we just thank you for each person that's listening now, and believe that you will speak to hearts the words they need to hear to fulfill your purposes, Lord. Turn their hearts to you and give them ears to hear. And thank you for your covering and protection in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
We're visiting with Kathi Macias. She is the author of the book Deliver Me, three-part series from evil, special delivery, and The Deliverer, which will be coming out in the fall. Kathi, two more things. Number one, if they would like to learn more about you, keep up with your books, is there a place they can go to find out that information?
Well, again, my website is Kathi, Kathi, Macias, Macias.com. If they can't remember that, they can find me at BoldFiction.com.
And one more time, how they can obtain a copy?
Again, at that website, although, of course, in stores and on online venues as well, but if they come to that website, they will see a link to all my books. They can look through the whole pile of them and decide from that point. And they can also click on the contact button and email me if they have a question. I'd be happy to talk with them.
Kathi, we want to thank you for coming back here on Second Chances, and please stay in touch with us and come back and visit with us again.
I will do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our guest has been Kathi Macias. She is the author of more than 35 books, and it is always a pleasure to have her here on Second Chances. Remember, we're here every week for more Second Chances right here at Lift FM 98.5, 103.3 FM, and 97.9 on your FM radio dial. And welcome to Second Chances here from Advantage Radio Ministries. This is Greg Hennis, and our guest tonight on Second Chances. Actually, she was with us, I think it was a couple of years ago, but time has a way from getting away from us. But anyway, we're privileged to have back with us today Kathi Macias, and she has just completed a series, a three-book series, and the newest release has just come out, but we're talking about the three series that involves Deliver Me from Evil, Special Delivery and the Deliverer. And welcome back to the program, Kathi Macias. Kathi, thank you for joining us here on Second Chances.
Oh, my privilege. Thank you so much for having me back.
It is a privilege to have you back. Now, for those of you that did not hear the program, we had Kathi on several years ago. We'll just bring you a little bit of information on her, that she is an award-winning author of more than 35 books. She is also a popular speaker for women's retreats, conferences, churches, and you live in Southern California. Is that correct?
It sure is. Yes, I do. About midway between L.A. and San Diego.
So here's an interesting question for those of us that have spent most of their life on the East Coast. Is that song true that it never rains in Southern California?
Pretty close. I mean, we don't get it often. When we do, sometimes it washes things away, but we don't get it very often. We do get earthquakes, and actually had a small one this morning, but other than that, things are pretty quiet around here.
All right, I have two quick questions on the geography out there. Interesting for the listeners, I imagine, but or actually just one quick one. Several years ago, I traveled to San Francisco, and it's a very foggy, cool climate. And the locals there told me that they do not like it when they get into the warm time of the year, which is late September and October in San Francisco, because they feel that the warmer the temperature, the more likelihood of an earthquake. Have you ever heard that before?
Well, no, I haven't, but we're so used to warmer weather down here than the San Francisco area. It's much warmer here than it is up in San Francisco, so I had not heard that correlation before.
Okay, well, I heard it several times several years ago when I was there, and that's why it has stuck in my memory. But anyway, Kathi, for those folks that did not hear us a couple of years ago, could you briefly share your testimony with us of how you came to know the Lord?
Oh, yes, I'd love to do that. I was not raised in a Christian home, but my grandmother, my dad's mother, born and raised in Germany, and her parents died when she was 10, and she went to live with a Lutheran pastor and his wife. They had a farm, and they took her in, and as she always put it, they told her about Jesus, and she would always tell us she had Jesus in her heart. And so she was really the Christian influence in our lives, and she prayed for all of us and talked to us about the Lord. But we weren't raised in that atmosphere. We didn't attend church, although occasionally I went with friends. Anytime I could, I would go with friends and then drop in at any church that was open, have the doors open. But it wasn't something we learned as a family. So when I was mid-20s, I suppose it was. By that time, my grandmother had gone to be with the Lord, although she prayed up till the very last day for us, and my mother and two brothers had both come to know the Lord, and so they were praying for me. My dad and I were the holdouts, and it was in July of 1974, July 5th actually, that I was just really wrestling with a lot of things in my own personal life, and I decided to call my mom, thinking she would feel very sorry for me, but instead she just said, "You need Jesus." That was basically all she had to say to me. She just kept saying, "I'll pray for you, and you need to pray, but you need Jesus." And when I hung up the phone, I just could not get that out of my mind, and so I got down on my knees and I prayed, and for the very first time, things began to place, and I really understood what that meant, about needing Jesus, and I just sensed that it was time to, even though I really didn't understand the words or what I was saying in maybe not the correct Christian jargon, but I did invite the Lord to come into my life at that point, and it drastically changed me at that particular point, and that was, as I said, July 5th of 1974, and things were never the same after that.
Once in July of 1974, when you made that decision to give your heart to the Lord, was writing a part of something that you had envisioned at that time, or was that just something that came later?
That was something that was always in my heart. It was a passion from the time I learned to read, which was very young. I loved books. I read everything I could get a hold of that had words on it, even before I began attending kindergarten. So I was reading very early, and I continued in that vein all the way through school, and when I ran out of things to read, I would just start writing them. And so if anyone asked me at any point in time what I wanted to be when I grew up, it was a writer. In fact, In fact, my husband even said to me that he remembers when we were walking home from school. He was my boyfriend then, and we were in junior high, and we were walking home, and he said, or I said to him, when I grow up, I'm going to be a writer someday. And he kind of laughed, and now he reminds me, he says, you know, you're probably the only person I know who actually knew what they wanted to do or be at that point in time. So I've always believed it was something God put in my heart, but of course until I came to the Lord, I didn't have any clear direction on where I was going. I was doing things like newspaper reporting, and I even did a weekly kind of about town column for our little newspaper where we lived. But it wasn't until after I became a Christian that I began just kind of seeking and pursuing how to begin writing Christian material, writing for the Lord.
Your first book, how did that actually come to be?
That was quite a few years later. I guess like so many people, you know, we think, well, if I'm called and gifted to write, I should be able to just jump in and do it immediately. And I didn't realize how much, you know, training and earning of spurs there needed to be in the process. But so it was many years later. I had taken quite a few classes, and I managed to land a job at Gospel Light Regal Books. There were, in the town I grew up in, Ventura, California, where we lived at the time. And it was an entry-level position, just part-time, no benefits, minimum wage. But I was so excited to have it, I really wanted to get into Christian publishing. And that was in the mid-1980s. And so it was not too long after that one of the Regal book editors, Mary Beckwith, she and I became friends, and we began talking about how we'd like to do a book together, a women's devotional compilation-type book. And so we ended up putting a proposal together and presented it to Regal Books, and they accepted it. And so that was our very first book, and then things sort of took off after that. But it's always getting that first one that's the toughest, getting your foot in the door to get someone's attention to actually look at something.
Often when we talk to authors, a lot of the time we deal with things, well, at least half the cases, something that the author really knows a lot about. And the other half the times we have a author, and I assume this is the case here, that they have spent a great deal of time researching a subject. And the 3-part series that you've put out all deals, if I'm not mistaken, with sex trafficking, correct?
Yes, it is. That's right.
And the first book was Deliver Me from Evil, followed by the second book in the series, Special Delivery and the Deliverer. So why did Kathi Macias choose to write about sex trafficking? What caused you to do that?
Well, actually, I was finishing up the previous series, a 4-book series called the Extreme Devotion series for New Hope Publishers, and that was about the persecuted church around the world, which in itself is certainly not an easy topic to research or write about, but one I felt strongly about and wanted to really, just open the eyes of a lot of Christians who maybe haven't had any of that kind of persecution, and they kind of know what goes on, but it doesn't become personal until you actually read about someone's life going through it. So although it's a fictionalized account, each of those 4 books, they were pretty much based on things that actually happened. So as I was pulling that together, I was talking to the publisher, and she said, well, where do you want to go next? You know, what topic do you want to tackle? Because I know that you don't mind tackling tough subjects. So we tossed a few ideas back and forth, and she actually is the one who brought up human trafficking, specifically sex slavery with children. And I just almost was appalled at the idea. I knew it went on, but like so many people, I think it was something very remote and not connected to my life. And so I said, well, I'll do some initial research and get back to you, and we can talk about and we can talk about it some more then. So I began to do that. I talked with law enforcement people. I spoke with investigative journalists, various people, and just found out things that were shocking to me. I spoke with people who actually worked in that sort of ministry, and I couldn't imagine the things that they told me, the things I learned, the scope of it, and how it really does go on here in this country. And so I began to do a little more research, and I talked with the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department, and they told me they actually have a conservative estimate of something like 100 to 300,000 minors being held in sex slavery here in this country right now today. Well, coming away with that kind of knowledge, I thought, I can't walk away from this. This is something that if I was that ignorant of it, I have a feeling that a lot of other people are to some extent the same way. They know what goes on, but I don't think most of us realize how extensive it is, that it goes on almost in our backyard. And particularly when you understand the ages of some of these victims being held, some of them as young as 2 or 3 years old. And that's when I decided, I called my publisher back and I said, yeah, let's talk about this some more and let's do this. So that's how that came about, and we decided to go with a 3-book fiction series that would expose the depth of it without, horrifying people. And, we certainly wanted to stay within the confines of writing books that would open eyes and yet, as I said, not shock them to the point where they couldn't read further. Because I always tell people I don't really write about dark subjects. I write about the light that shines in the darkness, and that's what we decided we wanted our focus to be, and why we called it the Freedom Series.
You mentioned in your initial research some of the numbers that you discovered here in the United States. What about when you factor in the U.S. and Canada? Big problem when you combine both of those two continents?
Definitely. Canada is really, really struggling with this as well. In fact, Miss Canada, right now, I believe the current one, she is actively working to expose this herself. She's very concerned about this. And I've spoken with people up there and have gone up and done a few TV programs on the topic. It is very widespread there as well as here, and certainly in places like Mexico, and we're kind of caught between those two borders. And much of it comes in across those borders, although many of those being held here are actually American citizens, especially the children who have been basically snatched off the streets. But there are primarily, so many of them are brought in from countries like Canada and Mexico.
Mm. So if I were to say, Kathi, how would you define sexual slavery or forced sexual slavery? What would you tell me?
Well, there are some specific ways of describing it and some very definite. Number one, if the person involved is a minor, it is assumed that it is forced, whether they seem to actively participate or not, because they're really too young to give that sort of consent. But otherwise, it is anyone who is held and forced into any sort of sexual act without their consent or permission.
Would you say that it's the same as human trafficking?
It is. Human trafficking, of course, encompasses a couple of other things like forced labor and forced military conscription, and even the involuntary donation of body organs, which is horrific to even consider. But all of that is contained along with sexual slavery under the umbrella of human trafficking. And human trafficking itself is the second largest illegal industry in the world. They figure there's somewhere between 27 and 30 million people held in some sort of human trafficking, any of those subtopics that I mentioned, around the world at any given time. And it brings in approximately $32 billion a year. So it is organized crime, and as you can imagine, those who hold the purse strings are not going to let go of them easily.
We're visiting with Kathi Macias. She is the author of the 3-part series on sex trafficking, Deliver Me from Evil, Special Delivery, and brand new just out, The Deliverer. How long has the 3rd part in the series been out, Kathi?
The final book, The Deliverer, has actually only been out about 6 weeks. It is a relatively new release.
Kathi, back to sex trafficking for a minute. I think you mentioned in one of your books that methods to condition their victims into prostitution and other forms of sex for pay. What are some of those conditioning techniques that these traffickers will use?
Well, there are several now with older people. I'm talking teens or people maybe in their young, early 20s. Oftentimes they'll use drugs or alcohol to make them more compliant. With little ones, the biggest thing, and of course this is across the board with all ages, they want to strike such terror in their hearts and have them completely give up any sense of hope. They want them to be hopeless. They want them to know that no one's going to come and rescue you and you are not going to escape. and you are completely and totally dependent on us for your survival. That's where they want to get them to, because once they begin to think that way and they've accepted that, they almost don't need to keep them on drugs or chained up. They're pretty much at their disposal. They could almost open the doors, and most of them would not even try to leave. They're so brainwashed and conditioned to believe that their captors are the only ones who will feed them or care for them, and they are at most points along the way they have come to a place where they are willing to do whatever is necessary to lessen the pain and to be fed and taken care of. So the whole thing, it's more psychological than anything else. They are beaten very often. They are obviously raped and humiliated and kept in dark places where they don't know what's going on. All of that is part of it, but it's all about a psychological conditioning to get them to the place where they are completely dependent on their captors.
Kathi, what are some of the most common destinations for victims of sex trafficking?
Well, it used to be other countries. I mean, obviously still is places like Thailand is a big place, and in India, and these are places where a lot of them come from, too, and places where people from places like America and Canada would go for a vacation, if you can imagine that. A male would go there and maybe rent a child for a few days or a week or whatever, and this is, what they call a sex vacation. They would do this sort of thing. But now many of them are being brought here. This is becoming one of the primary destinations here in the United States and in Canada, where these children are being brought in and held in brothels in neighborhoods where most of us don't even realize it's going on, and yet occasionally you will hear, not often, but once in a while you'll hear about a bus that goes down where many children have been rescued, and the people in the neighborhood are absolutely stunned because they had no idea that such a thing was going on within a matter of blocks of where they live.
Mm. Kathi, could you tell us a little bit about the how big of an issue it is with child sex tourism? How big that particular, I hate to use the word business is, but trafficking is, I guess?
Unfortunately, it's really large, and of course the internet makes it so much easier. I think that's one of the primary ways that these predators do their trolling, and they find places where they can connect, and many of them do still prefer to go out of the country. They want to maintain their privacy here and their maybe reputation and maybe even a family or something, and go somewhere completely removed from all of that. So it is a very big business, as you said, some sort of it just brings in so much money, and unfortunately the younger the children, the more money it brings. That's a little hard to imagine, but part of it is because the captors see that as more years of usefulness before they get rid of them, which very often they do when they hit a certain age and are no longer desirable to their clients. Very often they'll just basically just kill them, or in some countries turn them out on the streets and let them beg and starve to death.
Mm. You mentioned that some of these other countries, Thailand and different places, India, some of the sex traffic victims there are imported here to the United States. How does that actually happen with security and borders and things? Do they use some of the porous borders to the north and to the south of the United States to bring them in? Or how does that happen?
They come across the border all the time. We like to think that we have, the border patrol in place, and they certainly, just like with the drugs, they occasionally do stop a truck or a van or somebody bringing a group through. But for everyone that's stopped, there's a dozen more that get through, whether they're bringing people in for illegally to work or whether it's for the sex trafficking. They do get through more often than they get stopped.
Mm. Obviously, the girls and women who come out of the sex trade probably, in some cases, I would imagine, very much blame men for all the troubles in their life. But A, two-part question. A, how common is it to blame the men? And B, how often is it that a girl or woman will actually come out of the sex trade as opposed to those that don't make it? Is that very uncommon for them to survive once they've come out of the sex trade?
Yes, it's very uncommon, and particularly if they're taken as children. I've heard various figures, and so I can't say for certain, but all of the figures I've heard have been very low. I've never heard anything over 10% as far as those who ever escape alive. And those who do, obviously, as you said, they have such a terrible view of men in general, and yes, they do pretty much blame them. And so their chances of having any sort of a normal relationship are so slim. And this, one of the things that we really look for in this type of ministry are people who are willing to establish safe houses where these young women and children can go, particularly with the children. Sometimes it takes a long time to even locate their families or ever reunite them with them. So they too, along with these young women, need places to go where they can have a long period of healing, because as you can imagine, they are so damaged. It's not something that you just set them free physically and then set them on the path back toward a normal life. It is the emotional and psychological damage is so horrible that it takes a very long time. And people I've talked to, and there aren't many, but I have talked to a few who have survived and come out of that, but they will say that they know they are a very rare exception, and that it was a very, very difficult and long process of healing before they came to a place where they could ever have any sort of normal life.
We're visiting with Kathi Macias. She is the author of the 3-part series on sex trafficking. Part 1, Deliver Me from Evil. Part 2, Special Delivery. And the most recent part, the 3rd part of the series, The Deliverer. Kathi, as Christians and others that are concerned, what do we need to be aware of regarding the industry that would really be beneficial that we knew?
Well, I think primarily something I mentioned earlier about this being organized crime, although there are a handful of some individual pimps or whatever out there who have their own little stable of slaves, for the most part it is organized crime, and therefore very dangerous. It's not something we go into as a Lone Ranger ministry and try to rescue someone, even if we see an obvious case of it. What I really encourage people to do is to get educated on it first. One of the places they can go is the Department of Homeland Security's website and type in human trafficking and watch the video that will, it's not a long one, but it will really open your eyes to what's going on, what to watch for, how to safely report such a thing. And then at that point, I encourage people to maybe speak with their own pastor and find out if there's nothing going on at their church. Are there others who might be interested in starting some sort of outreach, even if it's just going to visit once in a while to one of these safe houses, or maybe establishing a safe house. If the church itself doesn't have anything, the pastor may know of someone else in the community who does. One way or another, you need to get under the covering of an established ministry. And there are many national ones you can find online, such as the Salvation Army has a huge outreach area. There's the International Justice Mission and so many others, and they're always looking for volunteers, whether it's to pray or to organize certain things. There's just so many different opportunities to get involved one way or another that there really isn't any reason that all of us as part of the church can't get involved to one degree or another in rescuing and restoring these victims.
Kathi, how can parents and others that are concerned be more vigilant, per se, to protect children from predators and others that mean their children harm?
You know, this is really important, and it's something that we are doing. We're going into schools and churches and daycares and talking to those who are caregivers of our children and explain to them that this is a real problem. It is something, it's not just the child predator that lives in the neighborhood, although that's certainly a reason for alarm. But there are predators who regularly just prowl areas like back alleys, and they watch schoolyards, and they look for that lone person, that lone child who peels off from the crowd and goes by himself to take a shortcut somewhere, or heads off to the public bathroom at the mall or the beach or something. This is something that first the caregivers need to know, and then they need to, in an age-appropriate way, explain this to the children. We are not trying to, take away your fun, but there are people out there who want to hurt you, and these are the things that you need to know. You need to stay in groups. You need to let people know where you are, where you're going, because it does happen here in our own country, in our own neighborhoods. And once those children are snatched off the street, unlike the movies that miraculously have the father somehow track them down and find them, this doesn't usually happen. Most of them never come back alive. And so the important thing is prevention and stopping it before it happens.
Kathi, something I want to get to here real quick. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to make sure we get to this very briefly. The books in the sex trafficking series are part of a larger series entitled the Freedom Series. Why is the title important, and what else are you working on in this series?
Well, this will complete the Freedom Series. From here, we're moving on to something else. But those 3 books, we really felt it important to call them the Freedom Series so that we take something that is so frightening, really, to all of us, and something so dark, and shine light on it and say there is hope. There is nothing too ugly, too awful, too dark that God's light can't penetrate it. We do have that word of hope that we can offer to those victims who feel so hopeless. And so that's the cry of all of us, is that we would rescue the perishing and restore hope to the hopeless. And so that's why we picked the name, the Freedom Series.
The Freedom Series, Deliver Me from Evil, Special Delivery, and the Deliverer. And Kathi, if one would like to learn more about you or these 3 books in the series, how do they do so?
I would love to have them visit my website, which is Kathi, Kathi, Macias, Macias.com. If they can't remember that, just go to boldfiction.com. They can find the videos on the various movies. They can contact me and be in touch if they have questions. They can see where I'll be speaking on different topics around the country. So I would love it if they'd stop in and say hello.
And finally, obviously, we're talking about the worst cases here of sex trafficking. But maybe, Kathi, there's someone who's listening to our program that has had other bad experiences in this same realm, maybe not on the scale that we're talking about, but they need prayer and they'd like to be set free, or maybe they've struggled with, having hurt from whatever the problem may be. Would you be kind enough to lead us in prayer to give those an opportunity to be set free?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Lord God, I just thank you that you are the one who gives us hope. Lord, you are the one who shines your light. You are the light of the world. And you've called us as the church to shine your light into the darkness of this world where hearts are crying out to be set free, Lord, where they desperately need you. They just need direction. They need someone to come alongside and offer them the hope of the gospel, the truth of your love for them, that unconditional love. And so, Father, we just thank you that there is nothing too hard for you, and that you are the God who heals and redeems and restores. And we ask you now to seal that truth to the heart of everyone who is listening to this program at this very moment. For all of us, Lord, need your restoration. We need your hope, and we need that unconditional love. And we ask not only that we would receive it, but that you would give us hearts to give it to others as well. Lord, let that unconditional love flow through us to all who need to hear it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Our guest has been Kathi Macias, the author of the 3-part sex trafficking series known as the Freedom Series, consisting of Deliver Me from Evil, Special Delivery, and The Deliverer. And Kathi, one more time, that website if they'd like to learn more about the books, obtain a copy, or learn more about you.
It's either Kathi, Kathi, Macias, Macias.com, or boldfiction.com.
Tune in next week for more Second Chances right here from Advantage Radio Ministries. And Kathi, we'd like to thank you for being a guest.
Thank you for having me.
And welcome to Advantage Radio Ministries, and welcome to Second Chances here from 98.5, 103.3, and 97.9 on your FM radio dial. My name is Greg Hennis. This is our weekly program in which we bring on people from all walks of life, and all of them have wonderful things to share that they are doing, have done, will be doing to glorify the Lord. And we have a wonderful guest with us. Actually, she's been with us, I think, 3 times now. Her name is Kathi Macias, and she's here with us today to talk about her book, Unexpected Christmas Hero. And Kathi, thank you for joining us once again here on Second Chances.
Oh, it's my privilege to be here. Thank you for having me.
Quite welcome. So, for those of you that have never heard us visit with Kathi before, Kathi, give me a little bit of background on yourself.
Well, I was born and raised in Southern California. Grew up in a very loving home, but not a Christian home, although I guess we thought we were Christians just because we were Americans and we lived here. And But pretty much none of us knew the Lord except for my grandmother, who prayed for us, and we all sort of came and got swept into the kingdom during the late 60s and early 70s. I was 26 years old when I got saved and never looked back. It's been wonderful.
Now, obviously, one of the things that certainly comes to mind, we tend to have a lot of authors on this program, and the fact that you've been with us multiple times tells us one thing. Obviously, you've written many books. How many books have you put out, Kathi?
This was number 40 that just released, the Christmas book.
Wow, wow. So what was your first book, and when was that?
Oh, goodness. Actually, there were two first books. They kind of came out within a matter of days of each other with different publishers. One was a women's devotional, and that one really did very well. And then there was a novel, my very first attempt at fiction, and shockingly, a publisher actually picked me up, in which there wasn't much Christian fiction going on then. But it was a smaller publisher. The book did not do as well, but it did fine. So they both came out right at about the same time, and that was in the late 80s.
Mm. So you've been putting out books ever since. Tell us how this most recent book, Unexpected Christmas Hero, came to be. Give us a little bit of a setup on that, if you could.
You know, I've always been interested in ministry in that area. I've done a lot of that, the actual hands-on making the pancakes at 5 in the morning and feeding the homeless people as they came in for breakfast, and also actually served on a board of directors for a group that oversaw several homeless ministries in the town where I grew up in Ventura, California, and really had a heart for that ministry for that reason. And yet at the same time, I honestly never thought about actually doing anything with it as far as a book, particularly not a novel, until someone in my own family who actually experienced homelessness for a while said to me, "Why don't you think about doing a novel and, just putting a face on some of these people and bringing them to life and helping us see what they really endure and go through?" And he said, "I really think that would be really a powerful thing to do." And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it made a lot of sense. And it seemed like the perfect book for a Christmas release because, people say, well, homelessness and Christmas, what do they have to do with each other? And yet, Jesus started out homeless. I mean, they were in no room for them in the inn. They were in the stable, and he was laid in a manger. So he started out by leaving his home in heaven to come here and to be homeless among us, even though he was raised by Mary and Joseph and had a home to grow up in. But he was away from the Father, so he was, in that sense, homeless. And so I feel like that really captures it. So it seemed like the perfect time to write a book about that topic.
So for those of us that have heard this, or maybe some of our listeners have experienced this before, but the Christmas holiday is perhaps the most stressful and lonely time of the year for many people. Did you write the book with all that in mind?
I really did, because, having one of the other hats I've worn over the years was I was a biblical counselor on staff at a large church, and I noticed that, I'd heard it said before, but I really saw it come to pass, that during the holiday season, as Christmas drew closer, our counseling load increased, and many, many people were very depressed and really struggled with being alone, with going through hard times, with anything that was difficult for them and heartbreaking at any other time of the year seemed to be magnified at this time of year. It was a time when they just felt like they should be with family and be having a good time and be anticipating it with joy, but instead were very, very depressed. So I really wanted to show both sides of that in the story.
If we live long enough as people, we tend to encounter hardships and turmoil. And how do you work these themes into your book, the turmoil, the encounters, hardships that we face in life?
Well, in talking with so many people who have actually experienced homelessness and having worked with those type of ministries myself, I sat down and just made a list of some of the things that people who are homeless struggle with every day that we would probably not think of because we're not in that situation, and just picked out maybe the top, half a dozen things or whatever that I felt like should be woven into the story. Just the struggle for for a safe and warm place to sleep at night, for a place to clean up and to make sure that you have food. And especially in my story, we're dealing with a young mother who has to take care of her two children, her two small children. It's one thing to struggle for a place to live and to sleep at night and for enough food to eat, but when you have to do that for two young children, that is just stressful almost beyond words. I really cannot imagine, although I talked to many, many people who said that is exactly what they dealt with on a regular basis. So those types of things you just sort of build into your story. You feel these are the things that readers need to understand that the homeless people deal with on a regular basis. So I wove them into the very fabric of the story.
We're visiting with Kathi Macias. She is the author of many books, over 40 books actually, including this one, Unexpected Christmas Hero. And Kathi, we're going to continue this conversation in a moment, but if someone would like to learn more about you, your previous books, this book, is there a website that kind of brings everything together?
Yes, there sure is. It's Kathi, Kathi, Macias, Macias.com. You can also just go to boldfiction.com. That will take you there. And it has, all the different books, the videos that go with them, places they can contact me, find out where I'm going to be speaking, just almost any kind of interaction they want, and includes they can sign up for my weekly devotional either in English or Spanish. So you can spend a lot of time there. It's quite an interactive website.
As you turn on the news and you look at things, one of the things that you hear about constantly is the economic upheaval, foreclosures, stock market swings, loss of jobs, and many people face new challenges, and especially when it comes to their faith. How do you work through some of those?
This is something that it is another point that those of us reading the books who have not been in that position need to understand, that as economy as it is, and not, turning around anytime soon, that we can see the homeless become very discouraged, because it's tough enough for those of us who have homes, who can fill out our resumes and update them and go online and look for jobs and clean ourselves up and go out and do a presentation that we hope will be positive and help us find a job. When you are homeless, you don't even have a place to take a shower or put on clean clothes or any way of printing out a clean, updated resume. It is that much more discouraging to think you're up against people who do look well and they smell good and they're clean and they're all updated on their resume and their job experience. How do you compete against that when you are living in the street? And so it isn't so easy to just say, well, I'm just going to go out and get a job and get off the street. That is something that is a great need, and we need to help people have the ability to do that. But when you are in a declining economy, it just makes the already almost insurmountable challenges that much harder to overcome.
What are some of the things that you've taken from your experiences with the homeless? Is there any things you've learned?
Well, in addition to the obvious that we want to be able to meet the necessary things like food and shelter and warm clothes or blankets or that sort of thing. All of those are needs. But the real need is to help them get off of the street, onto their feet, and actually working again. And even though, and of course I'm saying all this apart from the spiritual needs, which are the obvious, and yet many of them on the street do hear the word, and I'm amazed at how many come to know the Lord through these very difficult times. But beyond that, beyond the obvious as far as providing blankets and food and that sort of thing, we really do need to focus as individuals and as churches and civic organizations on providing places where they can come and use an address to receive their mail, make a phone call if they need to, get cleaned up, have clean clothes, put together their resumes, look for jobs online. These are all practical things that we need to at least give them a little bit of an edge, in trying to get that accomplished. And that's one of the things I've really learned, is that as much as they appreciate the sandwich and the blanket, there are some who really, that's all they want. They really do want to stay where they are, but most people don't. They really do want a hand up more than a handout. They want to be able to get back on their feet and get back into a home and provide a regular home and life for themselves and for their families, especially when they involve children. So that's what I've learned the most. Most of them, when you will spend the time talking with them, will tell you that as much as they appreciate the temporary help, they really wish someone would come along and help them make a permanent change in their lives.
This next thing is, I can certainly attest that myself, I'm guilty of this, as probably many others are, but it seems that when you turn the calendar to Thanksgiving, and between that time, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, is we all tend to, look more at the less fortunate and, think about how we can help them or this family or that family. What are some of the things that we can do to help keep people that are in these situations in front of us throughout the entire year?
This is really important because obviously and I know that the people who receive during that time are grateful. They're glad that there's extra meals provided for them and oftentimes extra shelters opened up in the cold part of the year. And for all of us to get out there and maybe donate a day, dishing up Thanksgiving dinner or serving to them or doing that sort of thing, it's a wonderful thing. But you're right. This is something we need to keep in front of us all the time, all year long, because the need is ongoing. It may be worse at certain times of year than others, but it is an ongoing, year-round need. And one of the things I've done with my own children when they were young, and now my grandchildren, is I find a picture of someone who, whether or not they're really a homeless person, but maybe someone who might look like they are, and have them put it in their Bibles or on their mirrors or in front of their bed somewhere where they will see them at least once a day and pray for that person and then ask themselves is there something little thing that they can do that even a child can, if they have an allowance or something, and put a nickel away and say, I'm saving that for something for a homeless child who doesn't have anything. And then periodically I take them with me to a homeless shelter where they can get involved in doing some sort of actual hands-on ministry. Children really respond well to doing that sort of thing, and so I really encourage people to do that as a family.
When you think about loneliness, Kathy, you think about, loss, death, divorce, broken relationships. They all seem to be in the most forefront, especially during the holidays. Why would you say that it's toughest in particular with these people that are in these situations, especially during the holiday Christmas season?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think it is harder then because especially if we've come out of a situation that at any time was relatively close to normal, we, maybe as children, remember those wonderful Christmas memories that we had of being together as a family and going shopping and having the extra special meals and gifts and things that maybe are just make that time of year so special. And of course, if it's a Christian home, then we have all of that to remember too. Maybe we went to church with our family and we shared the story of the Christ child and his birth, and we heard about the angels announcing his birth and the shepherds coming to see. And all of those things kind of tie together to make a beautiful memory. And yet, if you're not in a situation where you can experience that, where you're maybe homeless and you are just using all your energy just to get enough to eat every day and a place to sleep at night that's warm and safe, it just makes it so poignant and so much sadder that you don't have that going on in your life right now, and especially if you have children, you feel like you're not providing that for them. So it becomes a much sadder time of year. All the emotions are heightened, whereas normally, joy might be heightened. The loneliness and the sadness is heightened when you are separated from that kind of a life that those memories bring.
One thing that many of us are guilty of, I'm sure, is that we all tend to think that, hey, that guy's doing better, he has more money, or, his marriage is better than ours, or, all of us come into these false beliefs, and what is it that we can gain when we really look at the big picture and where do these false beliefs actually come from?
I think we all fall prey to that at times, whether we're homeless or otherwise. We all have this thing of thinking, well, everybody's better off. I'm the only one that has this problem, and so I can only imagine how much more how magnified that would become if you were in a situation like that. I think for me, it helps to keep it in perspective. When I do meet someone who actually has been or is now homeless, that suddenly I realize how much I do have. I have some friends that I met. They were actually homeless at the time, a young couple, and I met them a couple of years ago. And every time I saw them, I would drop off a couple of extra hamburgers or something from certificates from McDonald's or something so they could go get something to eat. But what they told me they loved most of all was that I would stop and pray with them, and I would actually lay hands on their shoulders when I prayed with them, because they said it's so rare that anyone wants to touch them, and they understood why, because they were dirty from being outside. But they said, the human being, everybody longs for touch. We all need someone to touch us, to care enough to reach out and lay a hand on our shoulder or on our arm when we pray or we talk. And this is something that we can remember how much a little thing like that means to them when we find ourselves maybe grumbling or thinking we don't have what we should have and we should have so much more. When you put it in perspective and turn around and look at it that way, it really does change the way we look at things and gives us a more thankful and grateful attitude.
We're visiting with Kathi Macias. She is the author of 40 books, including Unexpected Christmas Hero. And Kathi, that website that you mentioned earlier in the program, if someone would like to learn more about you, your previous books, or this book, or anything you're involved in, what's that website one more time?
Kathi, Kathi, Macias, Macias.com.
So the $1 million question is, the title is called Unexpected Christmas Hero. So the $1 million question is, who is your unexpected Christmas hero?
Well, this is what's really exciting, because now I get to tell you the story behind the story. The story in the book, of course, is about a young family, a young mother and her two children who end up homeless when her husband dies unexpectedly, and she had no idea what terrible financial straits they were in. And then they meet a homeless Vietnam vet who takes them under their wing and becomes their hero in a very miraculous way. And, of course, I won't share what that is. Don't want to ruin the story. But when the publisher was getting ready to design the cover, they sent the designer out to look for someone who might resemble the man named Rick, who's the homeless Vietnam vet in the book. And as he and his wife were walking around, they spotted a man who, like as the photographer said, he said it was like he had just dropped out of heaven just for the purpose of being in that picture. He looked exactly like the man in the book. So they asked him if they could take his picture and told him what it was for, and he got tears in his eyes, and he said, I really am homeless, and I'd be happy to do this because maybe somehow it will help me find my family. I haven't seen them in years. And the man's name is Willard Parker, and so we put his picture on the front, and I started an internet campaign trying to find the family so we could have this reunion. And sure enough, someone saw the picture on the cover and called Mr. Parker's daughter, Amber, and said, I think your dad is on the cover of a book. And so she Googled it, she found it, she went to my website and contacted me from there and sent me her phone number. And so we now have talked, and we're working on trying to get the family reunited. But, of course, because Mr. Parker is homeless and doesn't have a phone, he checks in when he can, but we don't know. So we're really praying that we will hear from him somehow really, really soon. He was in the Asheville, North Carolina area at that time, and someone who saw him at the shelter said he mentioned he might go to Georgia for a while. So we're trying to get a hold of him again so we can finally get everybody reunited. But he is the man who actually represents the hero in the book. He isn't actually that same man, but we just really felt like it was something that God it was like his fingerprints were all over this. We just saw him moving in it from the very beginning, from the time we found this man and got him on the cover. So now we're all just praying and posting his picture everywhere and hoping that someone will know exactly where Mr. Parker is and we can get a hold of him and finally put this family back together.
Mm. It is rather easy for us to become disappointed with God when bad things happen. How does that relate to the character and, handling death and things like that?
Yeah, we do, don't we? We do become discouraged, and it's easy to have that happen, as you said. Life just doesn't always work out the way we planned. In fact, more often than not doesn't. And I think that, when people come to me and say, just isn't fair, I say, well, you're right. And that, I think that when we accept that, life works a lot better. Life isn't fair, and the world isn't fair, but God is good. And that's what we need to stay focused on, is that there are going to be things in all of our lives that we don't like and that make it seem so totally unfair. And we really shouldn't be shocked by that. It's just part of living in a broken world. But when we can stay focused on the fact that God is good no matter what's going on around us, then again, it keeps it in proper perspective, and we continue in that attitude of gratitude, as they say, and that really, when we look at life that way, grateful for what we do have instead of being disgruntled about what we don't have, then we are better able to mirror the God that we serve and to introduce Him to other people who really need to meet Him. We don't need to be talking about a wonderful God when we're grumbling and not appreciating what He has done for us. So when we keep that in perspective, we become much more effective in representing God to those who need to meet Him.
When you think about prayer, a lot of us will pray and then wonder, hey, how come things didn't turn out the way that I prayed them to? The question we have for you, Kathi, is how do you present prayer in the book?
I do have, in every single novel I write, there's always someone in the background who is a prayer warrior. I want people to see that this is going on, even if that person gets no recognition for it, even if that person doesn't always know how God is working or see the answer to his or her prayers. God is listening, and He is effective, and He is faithful. And so in this particular book, I do have a woman who is a believer and through her church works in a ministry to the homeless, and she just loves these people. And one of the things that they don't realize she does is that when she goes home at night, she takes them with her in her prayers. She spends a lot of time in her rocking chair talking to God about these people, and God lays people on her heart, and she prays for them. And really amazing things happen as a result. So I have a prayer warrior in each book, and I think that that's really important for readers to understand.
And finally, the final thing I want to ask you about the book is somebody picks up a copy of Unexpected Christmas Hero. What would you want or envision the readers to take? They read it?
I hope it changes their hearts about not only a homeless ministry, but anyone that they might see and find themselves rushing to judgment over a situation. That person may or may not have had anything to do ending up in the situation they are in, but even if they did, God is so faithful, and His love is so all-encompassing that it reaches out to everyone, and that's what He wants us to do. And I hope that this puts a face on people who have such great needs, and that those who read about Him will respond accordingly.
And Kathi, finally, one more time, if someone would like to, obtain a copy of this book or any of your other books that you've put out in the past, this one, of course, entitled Unexpected Christmas Hero, how do they learn more about you, your work, things like that? One more time.
Yes, please come to my website, which is www.Kathi, Kathi, Macias, Macias.com. In fact, right on the front page, on the home page of the website, they will see a video about this book, and they will see something they can click on that says Help Reunite a Family. They can read more about Mr. Willard Parker, whose picture is on the front. And they can, as I said, they can contact me. They can order the books. There's just all sorts of things they can do there on the website.
And finally, and certainly the most important reason we're here, Kathi, is to give people that do not know Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior the opportunity to do so. And would you be kind enough to lead us in a word of prayer to give those listeners that are ready to commit their life to the Lord the opportunity?
Absolutely. Father God, thank you that you, Lord, you are truly our home, and when we are apart from you, we are homeless. And there's a homesickness that is stirring in our hearts, and sometimes we don't even recognize or identify it, but Lord, it can only be filled by turning to you and coming home to you. And that's what I pray for everyone listening now, for anyone who doesn't know you, Lord, that they would recognize that unsettled feeling in their heart, that sadness, that yearning, that it's simply a call to come home to you. And that's what we agree on now in prayer, Lord, that you would just call them, because your scripture says that no one can come unless you call them. So we ask you to call them now, and just to call them to come home and to be reunited to your heart, so that, Lord, regardless of where they lay their head at night, they are no longer homeless. They belong to you, and they will be assured of a home for all eternity with you. That's the desire of your heart, I know, Lord, and of ours as well. We pray that now in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen.
Our guest on Second Chances has been Kathi Macias, the author of the book Unexpected Christian Hero. Tune in next week for more Second Chances here from Lift FM.